caught up with Attila. He was all that now stood between Attila the Hun and the destruction of the West. 451 AD. Attila had destroyed everything in his path as he galloped through Gaul with his horde of Hun horse archers and barbarian allies. The Roman commander Aetius rode hard to the city of Orleans with his newly found ally, Theodoric, king of the Visigoths. Their army, like Attila's, was probably dominated by heavy cavalry, but it's impossible to accurately estimate the size of either army. Aetius had arrived just in time. Sangiban, the ruler of Orleans, was about to surrender to the Huns. A fierce battle began in the suburbs of the city. Attila, never afraid to retreat if the situation wasn't to his advantage, pulled his men out of the street fight and made for open country. If there was to be a battle, Attila wanted it out in the open spaces where the Hun cavalry could have free rein. Near Chalons, the Huns drew up their wagons in a circle to form a laager and prepared for battle. Attila made no attempt to fight until mid-afternoon. Instead, he stayed inside his wagon circle. No one knows why there was this delay. Maybe Attila was hoping to unnerve the Romans, or perhaps it was he himself who was unnerved by the sudden arrival of this coalition of his enemies. When he finally did march out, most of the daylight had gone. But the Romans had no difficulty in seeing the huge army which formed up behind him.
Attila's plan of attack was pretty simple, and that was to put the Huns themselves in the middle of the battle line and head as quickly and as directly across the field of battle and then tear apart the center of the enemy army.
Attila placed himself in the center of the line with his own Huns, armed with bows and lances. Most of these men, who combined mobility, firepower, and the ability to fight in close, were veterans of a dozen battles and skirmishes. On his flanks, he placed his barbarian allies, the Ostrogoths, Ardaric, and Gepids. These horsemen would have been armed with spears and swords, relying on mobility and momentum to inflict damage. On the other side of the battlefield, Aetius placed his Romans on the left flank. He ordered Theodoric and his Visigoths to line up on the right flank. In the center, he put his weakest link, Sangiban, and his unreliable tribesmen, the Alans. It came as no surprise when Attila prepared to strike at the weakest point of the Roman line.
The Romans had placed the weakest part of their force in the center. A person who was a commander of a group of barbarians who had just in the past few weeks been negotiating with Attila to surrender. The Romans placed that force in the middle so that they couldn't get away and couldn't run away. That's precisely where it turned out Attila's force struck. Attila's strength hit Roman weakness.
Aetius was no fool. His plan was to suck the Huns into his center. This would enable his left and right flanks to get behind the Huns and cut off their line of retreat back to their wagon camp. It was a ruthless plan. Aetius was prepared to gamble the lives of Sangiban and his men to help save the Roman Empire in the West. Attila ordered a mass cavalry charge straight at the Roman line, and the Battle of Chalons had begun. The Huns smashed into Sangiban's troops, smack in the center of the line. Sangiban fell back and the Huns pushed forward in pursuit. Aetius found the going tough. The Huns and their allies fought hard. And although the Romans were holding their own, they did not have sufficient numbers to completely outflank and envelop them.
His idea was that if his Visigothic allies on the right and Romans and Franks on the left could sandwich in Attila, then he could enfold them on the flanks and do some type of canine encirclement.
Rome's allies, the Visigoths, had also been held up by fierce resistance on the right flank. The battle was outstanding in its ferocity.
The casualties must have been staggering, although the numbers given in the sources are just for literary effect. But surely thousands of men were perishing that day.
The battle swung to and fro. Because it had begun so late in the day, the light began to fade quickly. If the Huns were able to fall back to their wagons, it would be very difficult for the Romans to attack a fortified position in the dark.
It was late in the afternoon, and it was getting dark. They fought until they couldn't see each other, and then the battle continued into the darkness. It was one of these battles without end.
But now the Visigoths, led by their king Theodoric, fell upon the Huns who were advancing in pursuit of the defeated Roman center.
The Visigoths